Okay.
I'm a very humble translator.
Yeah, very humble translator. Okay. Now here, a little paragraph which has what I would call an example of Talmudic reasoning. Yochel Rosh Chodesh. You might think that you could start the mitzvah of telling the story of the Exodus from Rosh Chodesh, May Rosh Chodesh, from Rosh Chodesh, not on Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is the beginning of the month. That would be 2 weeks before the night of the Seder. Talmud lower, no. In the verse that tells you that you should tell a story, it says, Bayomahu, on that day. The suggestion was start from the beginning of the month, but that means to continue. Well, it doesn't say exactly how far, but only starting from the beginning of the month, I would say to continue up to the holiday, into the holiday, that would be over a period of a couple of weeks. But the verse that tells you to recite the story says on that day. So apparently there's one specific day. So that first suggestion has to be wrong. So we'll try again. Yochel Mib'od Yom. Maybe on the 14th of Nisan, in the afternoon, we should tell the story. Talmud over, no, look again at the verse and you'll see that that's excluded also. Ba'avur zeh, the words for the sake of this appear in the verse. Ba'avur zeh lo amarti al b'shah sheyesh matzah umora munachim lefnecha. The words for the sake of this are only appropriate when the matzah and the moror are placed before you. Well, I think this is a bit of a mystery. First of all, why would you have thought that you could do it on the 14th in the afternoon? What's special about that? If you want to exclude that, and you say, well, look, the words for the sake of this are in that verse. Those words apply to a time when the matzah and the moror are placed in front of you. Okay. The 14th in the afternoon, take out the matzah and moror and put them on the table, and then they're placed in front of you. How do those words indicate that it has to be at night? It's like, if you're reading it and thinking it through, it's like it lands from the moon. What is it talking about? So, the answer to the first question is, on the 14th in the afternoon is when they offered the Paschal sacrifice. There already you are performing something in celebration of the holiday. So if you've already excluded doing it for 2 weeks from the beginning of the month, because it says on that day, which is one day, maybe when you start the performances by which you relive the experience of that holiday, that's what they did in Egypt on the 14th of Nisan. They started the Paschal sacrifice. And we're doing the same thing. Maybe that's when you just tell the story. That's a reasonable thought. Now it says, for the sake of this, so why can't you put it on the table in the afternoon? I think the answer is this. I don't know if you're aware of this, but from after Sukkot on, there are matzah bakeries all over the world. Some of them are baking thousands upon thousands of kilos of matzahs and sending them out all over the world. Some for the large local communities and some for export. Now, can I imagine a Jew saying, I know why God took us out of Egypt. He took us out of Egypt so there'll be matzah factories. So the world will be filled with crackers, all sorts of Jewish crackers. That's why he took us out of Egypt. That's probably not right. Right? God was not investing in a new type of culinary, artistic treat called matzah. No, if anything, he took us out of Egypt for the sake of the mitzvahs that we do with those items. The mitzvahs are only at night. You can only fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah at night. You put the matzah on the table in the afternoon, they're crackers. They have nothing to do with the mitzvah. Put them on the 15th at night, then you're pointing to the mitzvah. So, this now tells me that it can only be done when the matzahs are, and the moror, and the other texts where it says the matzah, the moror, and the Paschal sacrifice, are placed before you. Now, we raised the question a few sessions ago. How are the 4 mitzvos of the night of Pesach related to one another? There are 3 mitzvos of eating the paschal sacrifice, the matzah and the murr, and there's a mitzvah of telling the story. Here already, I think you get a hint. You might have thought that you could tell the story from the beginning of the month. No, it's on one particular day. So you might have thought you could tell it the afternoon of the 14th, because in the afternoon of the 14th you do something. You slaughter the paschal sacrifice. So maybe telling this story should accompany one of the mitzvahs that you do for the holiday. And then the answer is, maybe, but on the other hand, it says for the sake of this, and for the sake of this means that the items with which I'm going to do the mitzvah have to be in front of me. Our Hagaddah says matzah morah or Pesach matzah morah. They have to be in front of me, and it has to be at a time when the mitzvah should be done. The general message here is that somehow telling the story on the one hand and doing the 3 mitzvahs of eating on the other hand go hand in hand. Not just 4 mitzvahs to do. Let's see, sit down, make kiddush, and then we'll tell the story. Takes a couple of hours. Boy, that was interesting and exhausting and fulfilling. What's for supper? Oh, look at the menu. We have paschal sacrifice, and we have matzah, we have morah. Bring it on! Finish supper, and now I've done all 4 mitzvahs. No, that's not the idea. The idea is that somehow the telling of the story on the one hand and the performance of the mitzvah on the other hand have to integrate into a single connected performance. That already follows from this little piece of text that we just read. There'll be more to come, and Yetz Hashem, we'll get a deeper insight into it. But here already you see that they must be linked together in this way. Now, the next paragraph, I'll read it through to you, and then I'll explain to you where it comes from in the Gemara. Mitchila of the Avodah Zorah Hayavoseru. At the beginning, our ancestors were idol worshippers. From before. Now, Hashem has brought us close to His service. Shenemar. Here's a long passage from the book of Joshua. Joshua said to the whole people, this is what Hashem, the God of Israel, said. Your ancestors used to dwell on the other side of the river. Terach, Avi Avram, Avi Nahor. Terach, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor. Vayavdu Elohim Acherim. That is to say, Terach did, and Abraham did, and Nahor did. All of them did. In fact, if you have heard that Abraham came to serving Kadosh Baruch Hu at the age of 3, yes, that is brought in a medrash. The Rambam says that he came to serve Kadosh Baruch Hu at the age of 48. Another case in the Rambam is 40. The Rambam says that Abraham offered sacrifices to idols with his own hands as an adult. His thought process matured over years, over decades, until he came to appreciate the truth. So the verse here can be taken, according to the Rambam, very straightforwardly. That originally, Terach and his children, including Abraham, were idol worshippers. So God says, I took Abraham, your father, from the other side of the river. I caused him to walk throughout the land of Israel. Walking throughout a piece of geography is a way of making a kinyan, taking possession of a piece of geography. For Zaro, I increased his descendants. And I gave him Yitzchak because, after all, as you probably know, Abraham had at least 8 children, maybe more. He had Yishmael before Yitzchak, and he had 6 more sons afterwards, and maybe a daughter also. And they all had descendants. So Abraham's offspring became a great multitude of people. But in particular, I gave him Yitzchak. V'atein Yitzchak es Yaakov v'es Esav. I gave to Yitzchak both Yaakov and Esav. V'atein Esav es Har Seir. I gave Esav the mountain of Seir, the rest is also to possess it. Yaakov Onov Yardu Mitzrayim. Yaakov, his children, went down to Egypt. Okay, this whole verse is recited to tell me that, according to the paragraph itself, that our ancestors started as idol worshippers, and now Hashem has brought us close to His service. The verse ends with Jacob and his children going down to Egypt. That's not obvious that's where we're serving Hashem. Brought us close to His service, we think of the giving of Torah at Sinai. And then, if this is supposed to illustrate Hashem's investment in the development of the Jewish people, why is Esau brought in? And he gets the Mount of Seir. Why is that part of the story? And furthermore, what is this doing here altogether? We said that what we're commemorating, this was the Barbanel, the 4 questions. We said that what we're commemorating on the night of the Seder is the transition from slavery to freedom. So, this has nothing to do with slavery and freedom. It's an independent context altogether. I want you to know that this idea of what we're telling this evening is Machlokes in the Gemara, Rav and Shmuel. One says, tell the story from slavery to freedom, if I remember correctly, that's Shmuel. And the other one says, tell the story of going from idol worship to serving God. So, we have to ask, what does Rav have in mind? Why is he broadening the scope? What's the thought behind broadening the scope? Yeah.
Is it like to show us the pattern? That it's sometimes the Jewish people, we were worshiping idols, but then we'd get out of that, like with Abraham, his father's worshiping idols.
It's an interesting thought, to show a pattern that sometimes we, the Jewish people, were worshiping idols, and then we get out of it, and so forth and so on. Of course, if you're going to start with Terach, he can't qualify as a Jewish people at all. He wasn't a Jew, he didn't become a Jew, although he did die at Tzaddik, that's true, but he never pledged allegiance to Abraham's vision and his project. When they were on their way to Canaan, and he got stuck in Haran and never left there.
I guess it shows that Mitzrayim isn't only a place, but also a state of mind.
Mitzrayim isn't just a place; it's a state of mind. That's certainly true. I'm not sure how this shows it.
Wasn't Abraham mentally, in a sense, in Mitzrayim before Hashem told him Lech Lecha?
This verse would not say so. This verse would give you no clue that that's true. It may be true, but it would give you no clue to that. Here, the verse mentions Mitzrayim only at the very end, that Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. Mm-hmm. Now, there is there's a natural thought. You're studying history, and you're studying a particular historical event, so the more historical context you can give, antecedents and consequences, the better you'll understand the event you're studying. And that's certainly true. But how do you know where to draw the line? Here, the Hagaddah takes us back to the ancestor of the Jewish people, Terach. And by the way, all of the patriarchs and matriarchs are offspring of Terach. It's quite amazing. They're all traced back, their lineage back to Terach. He's the ancestor. They have, in the Yeshiva world, you see, if you daven before sunrise, if you say the Shema Esrei before sunrise, then your whole tefillah is only b'de evet. It's only second class. Mm-hmm. If you daven at sunrise, it's first class, so it counts more than davening with a minyan. Really? But if it's later, then it's perfectly good, just not quite as first class. But if you daven beforehand, then it's second class. It's mamish second class. That should be avoided. So they call it Terach's Minyan. Because he was one generation too early and didn't make it. He just didn't make it. He died at Tzaddik, he died as a monotheist. He died, but he didn't make it into Avram's group, into Avram's class, so to speak, with which all the followers did. So here's another thought. Go back to the flood and go forward to entering into the land of Israel. Surely, we became a nation after the flood, when the world was recovering from the flood. That certainly would give you extra context. And the Torah can't be put into practice until you get into the land of Israel, so that would be a bigger scope and would tell you more. Who told Rav where to set the boundaries of the extra historical context? Now, the Maharal has a long and deep explanation of this. I'm learning this with Chavrusa. I can't explain it because I don't fully understand it. But I can tell you a fairly obvious thought, and that is that what Rav is telling you is you can't understand the transition from slavery to freedom at all unless you see it as part of a broader transition from God, from idol worship to serving God. A statement of freedom is worthless. It is insignificant unless it contributes to something with which you do with the freedom. And if you don't know that it's a transition from idol worship to serving God, you have no meaning for the transition at all. That, I think, is Rav's message. Tonight in Mitzvah Hashem, I'm going to speak about the value of freedom, why freedom has value. I don't think it's obvious at all why freedom has value. I think there's a lot of mistaken talk about it. I want to try to correct it. But Rav is just simply telling you, if you don't put in this much context, you have nothing. You have nothing that's worth it. More context? Yes, sure. The more context you put in, the better you'll understand. But this is absolutely necessary context. I think that's what Rav's position is. Now, the Maharal says, from the fact that we start the Hagaddah with going from slavery to freedom, so that shows that we paskin like Shmuel. But Shmuel didn't say that his is the only, he said it's the most important part. That's why we put Rav's paragraph in here, because we really are fulfilling both of them. This isn't if we took sides to one or the other. It's just a question is which is more important. We do hold that going from slavery to freedom is a more important part. But putting this in, we could also say is a necessary piece. Yeah.
I was going to ask, the previous paragraph ends off talking about how bitter this whole thing was. That the Torah adds, because of this, the matzah mar are set before you, and this paragraph is talking about idol worship and all this seemingly negative things. So I was wondering if that's maybe the reason why it's in that order, like it's giving us.
Very interesting. I'll just repeat it for the recording. They're asking whether the previous paragraph ended with matzah mar, which conveys a sense of bitterness, and now we're talking about idol worship. Maybe that's the reason why the order is that way. It's a natural thought, but I think that maybe I failed to communicate this, or maybe you came in after that. The previous paragraph is talking about the mitzvah of eating matzah. The mitzvah of eating matzah isn't bitter. Not bitter at all. That's a glorious mitzvah. And the other texts of the Hagaddah, where it says Pesach matzah mor, our text is written for our time. We don't have the Pesach, but when they were sitting in the temple, they must have said Pesach matzah mor, and the Pesach isn't bitter at all. I don't think the reference here is to the bitterness of the substances. I think it's referring to the glory of the mitzvah. So I don't think that would be a sensual connection. Now, I just want to point out, we mentioned about Esau. You know, you'll hear people talking about religion generally, they talk about the Jewish God. What they mean is the God whom the Jews recognize. They probably don't mean that he isn't the creator of the universe, but the words lend them to the impression that well, there's a Jewish God, there's a Christian God, and a Muslim God, and Hindu gods, and they're all different gods, and they all have different roles and so forth and so on. Right? Here, the verse is very careful to tell you, Yeshua says to tell you, God's running all of history. Esau isn't Jewish history. But he gave to Isaac 2 sons. He made him the father of one non-Jewish son and the father of a Jewish son. And he specified a position of possession for Esau, gave it to him as an inheritance, and sent Jacob and his children down to Egypt for their position and their development. Don't be confused in thinking that, that the God of the Jews in the sense that our God, the God we believe in and worship, that God is taking care of us and the rest of the world is somehow under other powers or influences or forces. That's certainly not at all a Jewish view.
What does it mean, like when it says, like in the same paragraph, Amar Hashem Elokei Yisrael? So what does that say?
Okay, what does it mean to say the God of Israel? That means he has a special relationship with the Jewish people. That's true. We function as his witnesses in the world, Adai. But that doesn't mean he isn't running the whole world. That doesn't mean that anybody who addresses his prayers and praise to some other fictional imaginary power isn't making a mistake. He's making a mistake because there aren't any other powers. There's only one power running the world. It's just that he chose a relationship with the Jewish people. And by the way, since you mentioned it, and for the sake of the recording, let me just take a few minutes to survey a little bit of Jewish history, ancient Jewish history. I'm not talking about the first monarchy and the second monarchy. I'm talking about our picture of history. HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not create a world with 2 segments of population, an upper and a lower, the chosen ones and the unchosen ones. That's not how he set it up. Indeed, the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu instituted history, that was a great effort to avoid that. First of all, you have Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden. Had they succeeded at their task, that would have been the end of human history with no 2 groups, an upper group and a lower group. And by the way, this is something, again, you should just know. I can't go into it in detail at the moment, but Adam and Chava were Jewish. They were Jewish. Because what we call being Jewish is what humanity should be, as you'll see. Okay, they failed. So then they failed and they were expelled from the Garden of Eden and they began to fill the world with people. And says Ramchal in the Derech Hashem that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hand was out to anyone and everyone to step back into a relationship with the Garden of Eden, to step back into a relationship with the original creation. Everyone could have done it equally. Only Abraham did it. But the door was open for everyone. No preferences. That was stage 2. After Abraham did that, and the 70 nations were divided, nations or parts of nations could have joined Abraham, and the whole world could have joined Abraham. That was stage 3. Stage 4, as you probably know, there's a midrash that says that when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people on the 6th of Sivan, 2 days before that, on the 4th of Sivan, he had Moshe Rabbeinu tell the people, the creator of the universe has a Torah, he wants to know whether he would like to receive it. No mountain hanging over their heads, no sound of the shofar, no lightning, no earthquake, just Moshe Rabbeinu offering them a project and see whether they will take it. The Midrash says, simultaneously, all the nations of the world had a similar proposition. From whoever their leader is, whether it's the king or the high priest, or whoever they recognize as leader, the creator of the universe is sending a message to you. Do you want to accept his Torah? Everyone was offered it simultaneously, and everyone could have accepted it simultaneously. And then there would have been one people with one status and one project. The rest of the world said no. That was stage 4. After that, the door is open for non-Jews to convert, and the ideal resolution for mankind would be if everyone would convert. So God is not into an upper group and a lower group, and chosen ones and unchosen ones, favoritism and so forth and so on. That's not God's preference. It's a repeated attempt to reach all of mankind equally, and repeatedly being rebuffed where the rest of mankind say, no, we're not having it. So, when it says Elokei Yisrael, he could have been Elokei HaOlam, he could have been, as he will be in a certain sense, in the Messianic era, but this is something which, in the present time, he only has that special relationship with the Jewish people. That's very, very important to keep in mind. Yeah.
It's interesting, this whole concept, and how in Derek Hashem, like in talking about the world to come, it talks about that righteous Gentiles would be like secondary to the Jewish people, and like as a garment is secondary to the one who wears it, and all these things. And I wonder, like, if it was an informed decision that the nations rejected the Torah, like if they would have known that they would be missing out on so much.
Well, the extent to, you asked whether they made an informed decision, the extent to which they were not informed, the extent to which they corrupted the tradition that was given to them. Noach is the great-grandfather of all of them, and he was a direct prophet, so he knew these things. And Shem Be'aver had a school teaching the teachings that went back to Noach, which then went back to Abraham, and the information was there. And if they corrupted it, so then it may be less informed, but usually the rule is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't demand of someone more than what he could be expected to do. So he gives each person choices, maybe little choices, in his lifetime, and there he could make it rightly or wrongly, and that would be counted for him. But maybe I didn't bring out the point that I wanted to make before clearly. You'll talk to anthropologists of religion, and they will tell you that every religion is based on an in-group and an out-group. And the very sense of identity is, we're not like you. We're above you. We're better than you. We're different from you. And then they will apply that to Judaism like it does for other peoples, because at present, where there definitely is a difference between Jews and non-Jews. What they don't understand, this is typical, because they don't read the sources, they don't go into them in any depth, what they don't understand is that the ideology of Judaism rejects that. Our greatness is not because there are other people who are less than we are. It would have been preferable if everyone would have been equal to us. It's not based on the fact that we stand out as opposed to other people. It's not an essential element of the ideology.
But like people had this much free will in like affecting Hashem's plan for humanity?
You know, you don't have to think of it as all or nothing in one shot. You can think of God, and this is true for everyone, I think, leading people through small decisions. And if you make small decisions correctly, then you give an opportunity to make richer decisions, and more information comes your way. There were people studying with Shem and Aver. They had a school. You know, who were the people who were studying there? How did they get there? They got there because they made certain decisions correctly, and then they were worthy of being put in a position where they would get more. By the way, the sources say that when this opportunity was given to the non-Jewish nations of the world, not everyone said no. There were minorities in various nations that said yes. And that's one of the sources of converts. They are the descendants of those people form some of the converts to the Jewish religion. Their yes gets acted out in the end. It gets incorporated in the end. It isn't lost. So they knew enough. They understood enough to make the right choice. The majority said no. So none of us has the details to explain the rest of it. But when you know that that HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals with a person step by step, so you have certain decisions that are within your capability, within what you can understand, and then you take them. If you take them correctly, then you're pushed on to do more. I forget exactly who it was, who pointed out in the book of Jonah, you have what looks like an incongruous outcome. Jonah is a prophet, and God tells him to go to Nineveh to prophesy and influence them to change their ways. And Jonah says, nothing doing. And he books passage to another, going opposite direction geographically, to Tarshish. And it's a great storm, and the storm threatens to overwhelm the boat, and they investigate and find out that he's the one that's the source of it, throw him overboard. When they throw him overboard, the winds abate and it's fair sailing, and they sail on to port with no problem at all. So this Mefarish asks, who are the sailors? What kind of people are they? It's quite clear that they're idol worshippers. And even though the book says that they took vows to pay some kind of sacrifice to the Jewish God, that doesn't mean they gave up idol worship. Vast majority of worship of that time was called Syncretism, a little of this and a little of that. The Jews who worshipped idols didn't give up the Torah. We live in a time where the Jewish idea of truth has saturated so much of the religious world, it's accepted by both Christianity and Islam. That's only 3.5 billion people. Where we think that either you're on the boat or you're off the boat, either you're this way or that way. In the ancient world, it wasn't like that at all. You have overarching empires with their religion, they have your local gods that are controlling your local circumstances, and some of this and some of that was very common. So, because if you think of the ancient Jews who were idol worshippers, you think of them as abandoning the Torah totally. It's simply not true. It's simply not true. At one time, the king was an idol worshipper, and he had people promoting idol worship, and they were prophets of the genuine God, the genuine Torah, who were prophesying at the same time. And he didn't kill them because some of this and some of that was okay with him. It wasn't as if he had to stamp out. Only Achav and Nizevel particularly wanted to stamp out the Jewish. The others, some of this and some of that. Okay, so at any rate, we're talking about the fact that we don't need an undergroup. Yes, I was in the middle of answering a question of yours. I'll just put in footnotes. Okay, so that's what this passage is doing here, at least on one level, that this is a small part. Slavery to freedom is a small part of the transition from idol worship to serving God. Now, yeah, okay. But now this is a little, it's a seemingly very simple passage, and it's very tricky. Baruch Shomer Havtachasol Yisrael Baruch Hu. Blessed be he who kept his promise, or keeps, in present tense, his promise to Israel. Blessed is he. Okay. She'akadosh Baruch Hu chishev es haketz la'asos k'mo she'omar la'Avram Avinu b'ris ben Besorim. Kadosh Baruch Hu calculated the end so as to do for Abraham, our father, according to the covenant between the pieces. Shene'emar, Vayomer Avram, Hashem says to Avram, Yado Teda, you should know for sure, Kiger Yezaracha be'eretz Olahem, your descendants will be stranger in a land that doesn't belong to them. Va'avadum, your descendants will serve the masters of that land. Ve'ino osam, and the masters of that land will impoverish your descendants. Arba me'oshana, 400 years. I will also judge the nation whom they serve. And after that, they will leave with great possessions. Okay, there's a lot to figure out in this verse. Your descendants will be strangers in a land that doesn't belong to them, and your descendants will serve the masters of the land, and the masters of the land will impoverish, you could say afflict if you want, them 400 years. Well, there is what Noam Chomsky would call a syntactic ambiguity here. The form of the sentence is A, B, C, 400 years. Well, here are some possibilities. One possibility is A and B and C, all of them, the whole history described by all three of them will be 400 years. That's one possibility. But here's another possibility. A will happen, comma. Okay, put that on the shelf. And now, B and C will happen and take 400 years. Or, another possibility, A will happen, put it on the shelf. B will happen, put it on the shelf. And C will take 400 years. There are three ways to read it. It's ambiguous. Nothing in the words tells you how to read it. Now let's figure out. Which way of those three would make the period of maximum length?
Each one separately.
Right. If I take A and put it on the shelf, and B and put it on the shelf, not telling you how long they'll take, and then C is 400 years, so it's 400 years plus M plus N, and the M and N aren't specified. That's the longest possibility, right? But if I say A, B, and C are 400 years, that's the shortest possibility. Okay, now the verse says, God calculated the end. He calculated it in order to do what he promised to Abraham. What was the calculation? The calculation was which way to read the verse. As a matter of fact, they were in Egypt, how long? 210 years. How long was the slavery?
80.
90 or so years. So obviously, Kadosh Baruch Hu is reading it the shortest possible way. Being strangers in a land that doesn't belong to them, and being serving them, and being afflicted by them, all of that is 400 years. And as a matter of fact, if you go from the birth of Isaac to the Exodus, is 400 years. So, since there were three different ways to calculate the verse, and God chose the shortest possible period, that's the calculation that he made. Now he says, to do what he promised to Abraham, because our sources tell us that had the Exodus been delayed, there wouldn't have been anybody left to save. The Jews were on the edge of the cliff. They had gone through 49 gates of defilement, and sum total, there were only 50. One more, and they would have been lost. So that's what the verse is referring to. Now, Kates in Hebrew has the numerical value of 190. See, 400 minus 190 is 210. He calculated the Kates. He took the 190 off of the 400 and left them with 210 in Egypt, and that made it 400, so he could take them out at that time rather than at a later time and lose them. So that's one element of this passage. Now, the next little piece is the conclusion of it. And this is what stood for our ancestors and for us. Not only one stood up against us to destroy us. In every generation. They stand up against us to destroy us. Kadosh Baruch Hu saves us from their hand. This too is ambiguous. And again, this is syntactical ambiguity. This is what stood for us. What's the this? What's the this that stood for us? The way that I think almost everyone reads it, and it's a natural reading, is to say, well, look, you see that in every generation there are those who threaten our existence. You know what stood for us and protected us? Kadosh Baruch Hu promised us that he'll preserve us. That's what stood and protected us against our enemies. That is an accurate way to read it. But there's another way to read it. What stood for us is that there were enemies that tried to destroy us. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved us. Because the enemies that try to destroy us often are the ones who bring us back from the brink of assimilation. It's been observed by numerous commentators. The country in which Jews had the most successful assimilation, Germany, was the author of the final solution. From this point of view, that's not an accident. That's not an accident. The threat to our existence, which in Europe was largely carried out, the threat to our existence came specifically from the country which, prior to that, had welcomed us as assimilating, welcomed us as giving up the tradition with open arms. There's a message in that the fact that they stood to destroy us is a way of preserving us, and not allowing us to simply melt. I think that if you draw an analogy to the United States, we don't wish anything should happen to Jews anywhere in the world. If you look at the analogy, one should put one's thinking cap on to think what the circumstances are in the United States and what's being risked by the people who are rushing headlong into assimilation and intermarriage and adoption of American culture and all the rest. I think that should be taken seriously. So then Vihisha Amda goes on the whole thing. It has been commented that when the Chamoneki pogroms, the Cossack pogroms of the 17th century took place, that was a time of great assimilation. Jews were, shall I say, nominally and in external terms, but they were very comfortable, very happy where they were. I don't know if they go back that far, but the jokes. Husband comes home and he tells his wife, "I just heard the Messiah arrived. He arrived in such a place, 1,000 miles from here, but he's coming, sending his emissaries." And the wife says, "I hope he doesn't get here till next Tuesday." "Why not?" "Because on Monday we're supposed to get that new herd of sheep. Let it wait till Tuesday, so we'll have to be able to go with that herd of sheep. We need the sheep." Messiah should delay because it shouldn't disturb your receipt of the herd of sheep. And it's like, okay. So there's a kind of detachment from the identity that really sustains the Jewish people. A little bit like when we spoke about Megillas Esther participating in the celebration of Achashverosh, where what he was celebrating was the falsity of Jewish prophecy. 70 years are over. What Jeremiah said, you're going back, you're not going back. And we're celebrating it. And by the way, my Jewish friends, come on along and have a good time. Everything's kosher. The wine is all badats, no problem. We'll cater to your religious tastes and culinary tastes. Have a good time. Have a good time. They're celebrating the end of the Jewish religion. Kiviyachol. Okay. So we have to look at Jewish history as all of it focused on preserving us, and none of it is accidental. Okay, now tomorrow I'm going to start with the next paragraph. I just want to point out the problem, and then I'll leave it, and then tomorrow we'll talk about it. In the Talmud Bavli, in the Babylonian Talmud, when a matter of analysis is introduced, often the invitation is Tashma, come and hear. In the Yerushalmi, it's Tochazi, come and see. In the Zohar, it's Tochami, come and see. So we'll talk about the difference between Babylonia and Jerusalem, Israel, the way that you relate to things, what's the difference between auditory reception of information and visual reception of information. But here in the Hagaddah, it's Tzei Ulmad. Go out and learn. That's quite striking. I don't know any place else where we have that kind of invitation to a study, to go out. All the others are come. So we have to think what's the implication here where it's telling us to go out. Go out of what? And why should we go out? What does that contribute to the upcoming study in the Hagaddah?